So much. Welcome.
When I woke up today, I just checked my Facebook and I found such precious memories about 7 years ago, exactly 7 years ago. It says, today is the first official day of work at Somerville City Hall in a pilot program called Summer Viva that seeks to integrate the immigrant communities in the city by informing and giving them access to city services in their language, promoting their participation and celebrating their culture. A day to remember. So 7 years ago. So I don't think at that time, Irma Flores and I could ever imagine that we would be fighting back so hard against regulations that have been blocking immigrant families from having a permanent, secure future in the United States. So here we are. With the unconditional support of Mayor Curtatone and our director, Denise Taylor, we grew. Janie Centrin joined us in 2014 to work with the Haitian Creole community. And in 2019, Parshu started with his work with us in the Nepali community. He's here if you don't know that. Okay. Now Summer Viva got a last name. Summer Viva Office of Immigrant Affairs in a new office at 42 Cross Street. Yet, our team counts on incredible interns, and some are here, volunteers, and a new member, Maria Muti, Immigrant Services Coordinator, who will lead us now through an important speech on public charge. Yes, we will not give up the fight. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Maria Muti, and I joined the Summer Viva office at the end of November 2019, so just over 3 months ago. Still learning, still getting acquainted, but I'm thrilled to be part of such a wonderful team. And just as a brief background, I am an immigration lawyer. I worked at a nonprofit representing victims of sexual violence and filing for humanitarian immigration, so cases under the Violence Against Women Act, U visas, T visas, a few asylums. So that was really the bulk of my immigration background and immigration caseload. So I'm happy to be here with you all today talking about a not so happy new regulation, the public charge rule. So some of the questions that we'll address is what exactly is the public charge rule? And how, where does it come up? How will it apply to some of your constituents or residents? How has the test changed from what the previous public charge test was? In addition, how should we talk with families about public charge to see if it is something that will directly affect them or members of their family? And finally, what can I do to get involved? So the public charge test has been in order for someone to enter the country, they have to pass a series of what are called inadmissibility factors. And in addition to public charge, these can be public health considerations, criminal history, national security risks. So the public charge test is not a new thing. What has changed is it has been dramatically expanded by the Department of Homeland Security. It refers to a person who is considered likely to become primarily dependent on the government for their support. When making a public charge inadmissibility determination, the government looks at many factors called the totality of circumstances. So when it comes up, so there are two sets of regulations that are affecting immigrants. The first set is under the Department of Homeland Security, and this applies to immigrants who are already in the country, who are applying for their green card status, and that includes any permanent residents, also known as green card holders, who have left the country for 6 months or more and want to re-enter the country. There's another set of regulations that are under the State Department, and that applies to people who would like to enter the United States either as green card holders or as visa holders who want to come in from the outside. So those regulations are under the Department of State. A little bit about those, but for the most part, I'm going to be talking about the regulations under the Department of Homeland Security. Does this test apply to everyone? The public charge inadmissibility primarily will affect family-based immigrants. There's a large group of people that it will not affect, and these include asylees and refugees, and people not only have people who've been granted asylum, but people who are in the process of applying for asylum. VAWA self-petitioners, survivors of domestic violence, trafficking, or other serious crimes who would be applying for U visa or T visa for trafficking victims, special immigrant juveniles, also known as SIJ cases, and certain parolees. So the current status of the public charge. So the inadmissibility is assessed prospectively, meaning they're going to be looking forward from February 24th of 2020 going forward. They are looking at a number of different factors, and this is where it has expanded, where the definition of public charge has really expanded. It's called a totality of circumstances, and they are looking at whether a person is likely to become a public charge in the future. So these factors can range from age, and I'll go into more specifics about each of these factors, age, health, family status, income and financial status, education and skills, and affidavit of support. So the Supreme Court decision that caused the public charge rule to go into effect was, it was not about the substance of the public charge rule. It was about whether or not an injunction could remain in place while the lower courts figured out the legality of the actual substance. So the injunction was in place until towards the end of January, when the Supreme Court issued a stay of the preliminary injunction, meaning that the Department of Homeland Security regulations around the public charge rule could go into effect. DHS gave about a 1-month grace period for people to prepare, and that went into effect on February 24th. Like I said, the decision was only as to whether or not the injunction could be lifted. It was not about the merits of the case, so this fight is not over yet. There are 9 different cases around the country that are being litigated at varying times, so we're all hoping for the best, that we'll have a good outcome. So this is not the end. It may be lifted. So the State Department rules also went into effect on February 24th, and that was a bit of a scramble because there was really not a very long grace period at all. They published their regulations on October 2019, and then it was placed on hold while they were updating the Foreign Affairs Manual and putting forms in place, but it was approved for implementation on February 24th, and again, there was not a lot of warning for that one. And like I said, it applies for people applying for permanent residency and visas from outside the United States. And the regulations under the State Department are largely similar to the Department of Homeland Security regulations. So now we'll look at how has the public charge rule changed from what it was previous to February 24th. The previous definition was that an immigrant was likely to become primarily dependent on the government for subsistence. And what that came down to was 2 factors. Were they relying on cash assistance and/or were they relying on long-term institutionalization at the government's expense? So if they were not receiving cash assistance or they were in a long-term program being paid for by the government, it was not considered to be something that would apply. After February 24th, this is where the definition has really expanded. So the first is if a person who receives 1 or more public benefits for more than 12 months in the aggregate within any 36-month period. And under this, a receipt of 2 benefits in 1 month could count as 2 months. So if someone is receiving multiple benefits, 3 or 4 benefits, then that really adds up for a number of months well before the 3-year aggregate is met. The other is, and this is where the rule has really been expanded, is that even if they haven't received any of those benefits, the immigration officer can look and determine if the person is likely to receive those benefits at any point in the future. And this is where they bring in that totality of circumstances. So like I said, these are the 6 factors that they're looking at. And the first one is age. So they consider it a positive factor for anyone between the ages of 18 to 61. If you are considered too old and possibly not able to support yourself, that's older than age 61, or too young, being younger than the age of 18. The next one is health. Obviously, a positive factor would be you're in perfect health. A negative factor is that you are diagnosed with a medical condition that will require extensive medical treatment, institutionalization, or will interfere with the ability to attend school or work. Oh, that's a really subjective definition. And I should say, no one of these factors is going to be determinative as a yes or no as to whether or not the person can get admitted. They're taking all of them. And they're just as the graphic shows, they're basically weighing them and figuring out in seeing if the person is likely to become a public charge. The next one is family size. They have an expansive definition of a household, which includes, the household size includes anyone who provides 50% or more of the immigrant support, and anyone to whom they provide 50% or more support. So having a larger household may make it harder for immigrants to meet the income test. The next is income. The heavily weighted positive factor is if they make if they are at 250% of the federal poverty level or higher, which in the state of Massachusetts for a family of 4 is $65,500. For a negative factor, if they are at 125% of the federal poverty level or lower, that would be considered a negative factor, and for a family of 4 in Massachusetts, that's $32,750. There are other factors that they take into consideration for the income, including income of other people in the household, assets in cash or savings accounts. Application for a fee waiver could be indication that they are having difficulty making ends meet. Public health benefits received or applied for and not received prior to February 24th, but from February 24th of 2020 and after. Credit history and credit score, and enrollment in private insurance or resources to pay for reasonably foreseeable medical costs. Now that last one there are so many medical events that happen that are completely unexpected. So there's no anticipating for so many people that are applying that, God forbid, something happen in the future that they don't have the resources to pay for. They might be in a stable financial position when they're applying, but you just never know what's going to happen. Education and skills. So the positive factors are history of employment, that they're proficient in English and other languages in addition to English, a high school degree or higher education, degree and or skills, certifications and licenses, and their role as a primary caretaker of a child, senior, or person who is ill or disabled in the household. A negative factor would be no high school degree or equivalent, or they're not proficient in English. The sixth category is the Affidavit of Support. So for many people who are applying for their green card, they need, for all people who are applying right now for their green card, they need an Affidavit of Support from a sponsor saying that if they can't support themselves, the sponsor will help contribute and support them. So the previous policy was that the government considered the Affidavit of Support from the sponsor and the joint sponsor if they don't earn 125% of the federal poverty level or above. And it's usually the most important factor in the public charge test. The February 24th policy is that the Affidavit of Support is a positive factor, but it's not conclusive. It's not similar to all of the other factors. If they have that Affidavit of Support and the person says, absolutely, I will support them, I have no problem with that, that may not be enough to overcome the public charge. The government would also consider the sponsor's financial status and the likelihood that the sponsor would actually provide the financial support. They're looking at the relationship to the applicant and whether they're living together. So the heavily weighted factors under the totality of circumstances, the heavily weighted positive factors, the private unsubsidized health insurance, income, assets, or support at or at least 250% of the federal poverty level or above. The heavily weighted negative factors are a lack of job or job prospects, a health condition without private insurance or money to pay for care, and/or receipt of public benefits. So in terms of the benefits for the first part of the public charge definition, where they were talking about the 3 years in aggregate if they receive public benefits that apply, in the green squares, the longstanding policy, like I said, was the cash assistance for income maintenance or long-term institutional care at government expense. Those are also included in the factors after the February 24th policy. But there are additional ones that are added, which include food stamps or SNAP, Medicaid, and there are exceptions to this, which are at the bottom, for emergency Medicaid, coverage of children under the age of 21, pregnant women, and new mothers. Federal, state, local, and tribal cash assistance, housing assistance, which is federal housing assistance, public housing or Section 8 housing vouchers, and rental assistance. The changes will not be retroactive, and this is one thing that many immigration advocates are trying to work with the Department of Homeland Security to change the dates, because there are many dates. The original public charge rule was supposed to go into effect in October, but because of litigation, it pushed off because those injunctions went into place, the public charge rule couldn't go into effect until February 24th. A lot of immigration forms still have that October 19th or October 15th of 2019 date. So if you are working with anyone and you see that date, you can read it as February 24th of 2020. And this is I won't read the whole list, but these are all public benefits that are not included in the public charge. So some of the bigger ones are WIC, the Women, Infant, and Children Program, any kind of school lunch, subsidized school lunch or breakfast, benefits received by an immigrant's family members. And this is a big thing, particularly with housing and with food stamps. So if an immigrant has U.S. citizen children who are getting food stamps, those benefits will not be held against the immigrant when they are applying. In addition to that, the Children's Health Insurance Program, student loans, non-cash benefits that they might be receiving. So there are numerous public benefits that someone could be receiving that won't be held against them. So the impact of the public charge. People that are directly affected. There are a large number of people that would be applying for their green cards here in the country are not eligible for for a lot of the public benefits that are under the public charge. So in that respect, it won't be held against them. The hard part is the other half of the public charge rule, which is are likely to need it in the future. So that expanded criteria where they're looking at age and income and their health status, that's where it's likely to harm the greatest number of people. And that's where it gets to be, even though they do have the regulations laid out, they can be more subjective in terms of how an immigration officer would interpret them. The broader population of people in immigrant and mixed status families are at risk of what's called a chilling effect. And this is what we are seeing across the country in various public advocacy agencies where there's so much fear and there's so much misinformation about this public charge rule that as a safety measure, a lot of families are withdrawing. And that can include parents withdrawing food stamps that their U.S. citizen children receive. It can include people withdrawing from their health insurance and not going to seek needed medical care. It can there are just a myriad of different ways where people have withdrawn because they're nervous about how this could affect them when they don't necessarily need to withdraw. And this is where we're trying as much as we can, and where you all are so important to this mission, is that informing them about who is likely to be affected and who is not likely to be affected by this. Talking about the public charge rule to your residents, constituents, and the people that you serve. So like I said, the Supreme Court's ruling allows the public charge regulation to take effect while the litigation proceeds. So the litigation is in the lower courts, and they are working on the merits of the case to see if the public charge rule is actually legal. But the injunction was lifted by the Supreme Court. Fear, like I said, that is the real weapon. And misinformation, whether it's purposely given or accidentally given, that is a huge obstacle to so many of our residents being able to access the benefits that they are lawfully allowed to access. And like I said, the fight to protect the rights of all families to thrive and to flourish here in the United States is not over. Well, we're keeping our fingers crossed and saying our prayers for those lower courts. There was a handout on the table that has a kind of an expanded way of helping us determine who is under the public charge rule and who is not. So to really break it down in a nutshell, if you and your family members are U.S. citizens, you can apply for benefits without fear of public charge. If you and your family members already have green cards, you can go ahead and apply for public benefits. And that includes if you are applying for a renewed green card, and the only time that would affect you if you are a green card holder is if you leave the country for 6 months or more and you are trying to come back into the country. Otherwise, the public charge rule does not affect you. And then the special populations that I talked about. So someone with TPS, someone with DACA is not actually listed on there. DACA is also one of those areas where the public charge rule does not apply. U or T visas, asylum or refugee status, or special immigrant juvenile status. Those are all statuses where you can apply for public benefits, or you can continue to receive the public benefits that you're already getting and not have to worry about it being counted against you should you apply later on for your green card. Where we reach the yellow light is if you plan to apply for a family-based green card, and only the use of the programs covered in the regulation, the benefits that I went over, will be considered in the public charge test. And they will also take into account your income, age, health, education, skills, family situation, and sponsors' affidavit of support. And we really strongly, if there's any doubt whatsoever, we really encourage people to get in touch with an immigration lawyer so that they can really be very clear about what's happening and whether or not they would be at risk. There's an organization called Protecting Immigrant Families, and if you Google just Protecting Immigrant Families, you can find their website. They have a tremendous amount of resources for advocates, for residents, or for immigrants who are concerned and not sure if they want to apply. They know that they've put out translated documents as well, and they are still working on adding more translations for people to be able to access. So I really strongly encourage you to look at that website. It's a good first start. And that's on a national level. It doesn't have stuff that's specific to Massachusetts residents. There are a couple links to the MIRA Coalition, and I'll talk a little bit more about that for benefits that are specific to Massachusetts. So the take home is that most immigrants will not be affected. The use of public programs does not automatically make you a public charge, and many public programs are not considered in the public charges test, in the public charge decision. Yep. Benefits used by family members will not count in public charge decisions. So children, spouses who have either green card or U.S. citizenship status who are eligible to receive benefits will not be counted against the immigrant who's applying for their green card. And there are laws protecting the personal information of public benefit applicants and recipients. So that's also something, if someone were to apply for their green card and an immigration officer wanted to see certain proof about public benefits, there are limitations about how much information and access they could get. So these are just a few examples of different questions that you or the Summer Viva office might receive from people, just to give you an example of how the public charge rule does and does not apply. So the first one says, I was just granted asylum status a few months ago. Now I'm worried that using SNAP is going to stop me from getting my green card. In this case, because the person is applying for asylum, or was just granted asylum, public charge does not apply for them. Asylees are eligible for public benefits and should absolutely go forward and apply for them. The next one, I'm pregnant and need help. I'm currently enrolled in Medicaid, but I'm afraid it will be used against me. Again, the public charge rule does not apply here because this is, they don't consider non-emergency Medicaid used by pregnant women up until 60 days after they give birth. The third one says, my friend says public charge will apply to her, and so she disenrolled from SNAP, and she said I should too. And this is, again, something where everyone's immigration case is very unique and very specific to the facts of how they came here and what they're applying for. So while it may be appropriate for someone to disenroll from food stamps because the public charge rule would apply for them, it may not be the same. And so that's where everyone who is considering applying for their green card or has questions about the public charge should talk either with an immigration lawyer or an advocate who has comfort in explaining the public charge. The next one is, I'm scared to sign up for WIC. I know that WIC is a public benefit, and it is a public benefit, but is not a public benefit that applies under the public charge rule. Coverage under my Medicaid plan is the only option for health insurance for my children who are 12 and 19 years old. So the public charge rule has a specific exception for children under the age of 21 that use Medicaid. The kids would fall under the exception, and their use of Medicaid will not be counted against the parent who is applying. And finally, my brother is applying for citizenship but uses Section 8 housing vouchers. Is he a public charge? The public charge rule does not apply when people are applying for citizenship, so any public benefits that they might receive as green card holders will not be held against them. And finally, what can we all do to get involved? Like I said, the Protecting Immigrant Families organization and website is fantastic, and I encourage you to check out their website and get involved. They have an email listserv that they use to keep people updated in news and information. They are updating resources practically by the day. They also have a litigation tracker. If you wanted to take a look, it's a very dense litigation tracker. If you wanted to look at the whole procedure of each of those 9 cases that are circulating in the lower courts at various points in the country, you could definitely look at that. On the local level, you can go to either the MIRA Coalition, and they have a partnership with Protecting Immigrant Families, so they've created some resources that would be useful for all of us in representing our residents who live here in Massachusetts, and also Healthcare for All. There was a handout on the table that has a breakdown, because I know with Mass Health there are a number of different kinds of coverage under Mass Health, and some apply and some do not. So, and I'm an immigration law person, healthcare law. I have full respect for people that practice in healthcare law. It is a dense set of rules and regulations. So I defer to that handout that we gave you. And there's also a hotline on that flyer for Healthcare for All if you or any of your residents have questions about whether or not the coverage, applying for a particular kind of coverage would subject them to the public charge rule. They can take a look at that. So yeah. Meredith Campbell is our census count person. She was going to give a brief presentation as to how public charge and the census may coincide with each other, or fears about the public charge making people reluctant to fill out the census. So I will turn that over to her when she gets here, but for now I'm happy to take any and all questions you have.
I'm just wondering whether or not you might make your slide deck available in
I'd be
some
happy
way.
to send it out. Yep. And full disclosure, the majority of this slideshow was prepared by Protecting Immigrant Families. They sent it to people, an editable PowerPoint presentation. So you'll see if you go on the Protecting Immigrant Families, they said we could cut and paste. So I don't want you to think I'm plagiarizing anything. But yes, absolutely, I'm happy to email this out. Did everyone sign up on the sheets with their emails and everything? Okay. Yep. Happy to. Yep.
So I have a question and a couple of things to add, but I'll ask the question first. This came up today. If you put yourself on a waiting list, say for federal side housing down at the Mystic or some other federal benefit, you haven't been granted the benefit, but you have applied in some way. Is that going to count against you?
Right. So are there any housing advocates here by any chance? Okay. So I think I'm not as familiar with housing law. When you put yourself on a wait list, I'm not sure if you fill out an application and then you are put on the wait list, or if you just submit your name, and then when your name comes up to the top of the wait list, if you then fill out an application process, because that may be the dividing point as to be considered a recipient of a public benefit. I think you could argue pretty hard that they are not a recipient, because again, they're on whether or not they've submitted an application, they are not. They're not actually receiving that benefit at that point. But Irma, there is going to be a forum on by the Lawyers for Civil Rights on the public charge. It's a public charge workshop and legal clinic, and they do have people who specialize in housing that would be able to answer some of the more specific questions about housing. And they can answer that. I can also, when I send out, I'll do some research into that, and when I send out the slideshow, I can provide an answer.
Okay. So then a couple of additions. There are forms of health insurance in Massachusetts that are state health insurance. They don't count against you. Determining, so we're working with the Cambridge Health Alliance has been really supportive of trying to figure this all out, what counts and what doesn't count in terms of benefits. So their financial people are working on this. Getting involved, we have a weekly meeting here at City Hall, the Somerville Sanctuary City Steering Committee. There's many members here already. Anybody else is welcome to join. We concentrate on getting these kinds of messages out, doing Know Your Rights workshops, other things that will help reduce the level of fear in the city. And then, this is just a sort of a footnote. If you're working with people who are filling out any of these immigration forms, currently the asylum application and U visa application, if you leave anything blank, they will reject you. The suspicion is that this is going to spread to all the other bazillion forms with strange numbers and titles. So what, not officially, but sort of from USCIS, the thought is have people fill in everything. They can write NA or not applicable or none or whatever you want. As long as there's something in the blank, it won't get rejected for that reason. And then the other thing is we did here a Dance for Dignity to raise money for pro bono immigration lawyers to support Greater Boston Legal Services and De Novo in Cambridge and others. There's going to be another one in Arlington, so I'm going to turn the microphone. Just tell them about. So Arlington, 14th, Saturday evening, a second Dance for Dignity at the Unitarian Universalist Church. Stanley and the Undercovers will be performing. Somerville's own Shaboom is going to be there, which is worth the price of admission right away. So it's online. You can either talk to me or Stanley, or we've got lots of flyers. So thank you.
Great, thank you. I know I threw a lot of information at you, so if you think of something afterwards, please feel free to email me. I'm at the Summer Viva office, and I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have. So thank you so much. Meredith, do you want to come up?
Hello, everyone. Thanks. Rushing from another meeting. I just wanted to give a brief, just kind of check in on how public charge basically is not tied to the census and make that clear so everyone knows how to talk to folks about the 2020 U.S. Census in relation to public charge. So, we can kind of understand the public charge rule as being yet another tactic to discourage people, among other reasons for its existence, to discourage people from participating in the 2020 census. So one really important thing is making sure that folks who are working with immigrant communities are informed about how important the census is and how to communicate that to the folks that you work with. Just briefly, part of that messaging is tying both the importance of the census, that fact that completing the census helps secure funds in the city of Somerville and wherever anyone lives for things like housing, education, healthcare, transportation, infrastructure, and kind of subcategories under that includes multilingual programming, special education, food security programs, things that a lot of families rely on. Excuse me. And also making sure that folks understand that it is confidential. So a little bit about that. So by law, census data cannot be used for any other purpose other than statistical. So it cannot be used to determine eligibility for any benefit, including immigration benefit, cannot be used to determine whether someone can receive a housing benefit or a food program benefit. And Also under law, based on Title 13, it is illegal to share census data with any other government agency, which includes DHS, UCIS, ICE, IRS, HUD, anybody. So no other government agency can see that, and that is a law that is enforceable with a $250,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison, and it applies for all census workers. One thing to also make sure that folks understand, if they're really nervous about immigration processes and this new public charge rule, is that if you ignore the census because you feel uncomfortable filling it out, that's not going to prevent census workers from coming to your door and continuing to mail you lots of things. And having a federal worker come to your door and knock on your door, they can come up to 6 times, could be a lot more scary for folks rather than just filling it out. So the advice and making sure that people know that fill it out right when you get it, because if you wait, someone will come to your door, and that's not a threat, that's just what's gonna happen. So on the census form, there are, and folks will probably have questions about this, there is a place to put your name and phone number. And that is really just used to make sure, the Census Bureau uses that in-house to make sure that there are not duplicates in the responses. So they'll match, if 2 names come up from at different addresses, they will check it, and they have a phone number so they can follow up with people to clarify any data. And this is, in cases where like a college student might fill out a census form, but their parents might also fill it out, or children who live in different addresses, split time between 2 different households. If families feel really nervous about this part, officially we want to communicate that it is safe for them to put this information on there, but if that's going to prevent them from completing the census, then they can put initials, especially for people who live in their household. So when you list on the one census form, you put the head of household, which can be anyone, in fact, who lives there, and then every other person who lives in that household. And you can, some of the advice from immigrant advocacy organizations is to put initials in place of the full names, if that helps reassure people, and if that's the only thing preventing them from completing a census. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing, for sure. Additionally, I mentioned anyone can be the head of household, so if there is someone living in a household who might feel safer about putting their name and their number, a lot of mixed status families, then anyone can kind of designate themselves as the head of household. I brought some flyers that explain a little bit more about the confidentiality in the census, so please grab these on your way out. I have them in Spanish as well, and a few in Haitian Creole. But basically, bottom line is that the US Census data is not in any way related to the public charge rule and will not be used to try to figure out if someone, under the public charge rule, if someone is relying on public benefits, or to verify where somebody lives, and it's just completely disconnected, and it is not shared at all with any other government agency. Any questions about that? Yes, Rita, Sister Rita.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. You were trying to reassure us, while we reassure the people, that don't worry, this will not affect anything on public charge. It's all this great confidence. What happens if a family just simply will not open that door, if they don't do anything by paper? That's one question I have. I guess they just kind of like disappear, or what? And the second question I have is NPR did, I think it was this morning or last night, something about doing things through the computer. And then people were raising questions about the security of that. You did not mention that like as a third piece. There was like writing out on paper or going to the door. And what about the computer thing? If people ask us in general about computer information and the security of that. And the gentleman who was speaking said, it was like it was like Fort Knox, in terms of security, and so we are to believe that. Where are we with that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so to address that part about the security, so this is the first time ever that the U.S. Census will be online, and that is the primary response form for most people completing the census. I heard the same thing on NPR actually this morning. So they have, from what I understand, there are a lot of data protection steps that the U.S. Census Bureau has taken. Apparently that the U.S. Census Bureau, and this is what I've heard from them, is far better protected in terms of cybersecurity, and this is security to prevent hacks and people stealing data, than almost any other government website. That is what's been shared from the U.S. Census Bureau. I know they're not giving out that many details of what that really means and what they've specifically done to do that, because they don't want to give anybody any hints on how they are doing this security, so they're not getting really into the details of it. But what I've heard from the U.S. Census Bureau is that the site is, they have really ramped up cybersecurity in a way that does not compare to other government websites. Also that they have, one of the elements of the security is to make sure that no one accessing the form is using a foreign IP address, so to prevent hacks that coming from outside the United States, for example. And there was another question that you had. Right. Yes.
Nobody opens the door. Even though we try to encourage, if you fill this out, it's going to be helpful because you will continue to receive help, and the whole city will too, and financial supports will be coming. We can try to convince, but what happens with that? They'll probably just say, I don't open the doors, so they don't get any response, and so I don't exist.
Right. So the U.S. Census is required by law, by everyone who lives in the United States. The consequence of that, and as far as I'm aware, no one has ever been persecuted for not doing the census. So you will probably be able to just fall off the map. But, as you bring up, there are kind of secondary consequences to that. But as far as someone like a law enforcement coming to your door to say, you didn't fill out the census, so you're in trouble, that is not something that seems like a big risk right now at all. And as far as I'm aware, it has never happened before.
And when families are doubled up or tripled up, how is this handled? It's just as head of household, then you just list everybody else? People are going to be reluctant. That's one half of the question. The other half is, are you doing anything with like Somerville High School or whatever? Given our experience in outreach, the fluently bilingual teen in the family is often the person who opens the mail and does the credit card and all that. So those are the people who, they're not the head of household, but they are the person that communicates and is going to be able to respond or not.
Right. So for families there might be several different families living in a single household, or for roommates who are not related and might just be kind of like a rooming house, everyone needs to be counted on one census form. It's one census per household, per unit or apartment. So everyone needs to be listed on there. So that's kind of one of the challenges is, making sure that everyone knows that, and also kind of giving people a heads up that, okay, nominate a census captain in your house and have them fill it out for everybody. One way, because this is online, one way that, or one kind of advantage of it being online is that you can submit an online form for your household multiple times. It's not really ideal, but say one family living in a household fills it out for their family unit, and then another family living at that household fills it out for their family unit, the census will merge that data. So if it's really difficult to kind of coordinate larger households to fill it out on one form, the census on the back end has their way to try to match people up to the same address. And they will basically collect everything and use the form that has the most information on it. A note about that, however, is in terms of the questions, there are 10 questions per each person living in the household. And if you leave too much information off of the form, they will try to get in contact with you and give a call to try to collect a little bit more information. So that's might be good to let people know. If they are going to fill it out, try to be as complete as you can, as you are comfortable with, because otherwise they could still come and knock on your door or give you a call. And there was another question. Yes, so anyone can be the head of household. So this is something that we are working with the high school, working with different programs in the high school as well as across different organizations and groups that work with K through 12, is teaching students about what the census is so that they can kind of be ambassadors of the census for their own families. Hi.
Based on the last meeting, and I think we mentioned that's where the person, the household person, that's the name you have to put on the paper, and the rest of the people, you just put how many people on that house. Is that how that works? Or you said there are questions for each of them?
Yes, there are 10 questions for each person, and each one of those people does include that question with putting the name. There's only one phone number, but everybody's name, there's like a spot for each person in the household to list their name.
Okay.
So does this start on April 1st? And how should we be directing people to go online? 2020census.gov?
It starts to roll out March 12th. That's the earliest people can start to fill it out. Census Day is April 1st, so that's like the big day we really want people to kind of be targeting to fill it out. And it is my2020census.gov. Is the
MY20,
Yeah.
okay, my20, okay.
Although their 2020census.gov is like the landing page right now, so I'm sure they're going to have a big link to fill it out. It's been a little bit difficult getting what those specific links are from the U.S. Census Bureau. Yeah. To clarify, everyone's going to get an invitation in the mail that will have the link and tell them to go online to complete it. Mm-hmm.
So my question is regarding your mention of the initials on the census form. So can a family, if the fear is so high, can they just put initials under every single section for a name?
There's definitely nothing preventing them from doing that. Okay. Yeah, and if that's what is going to be the make or break between filling it out versus not, then it's a middle ground that's acceptable.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'll leave these up here.
Thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure always to see you and share this information with you. I think this is a conversation to be continued, right? And we have some lunch for you. We have burritos, so enjoy it. And one more time, thank you for being here. Thank you.